I just hope that the players understand, no, this is not just another game. This is a real chance to really, really change something with this program, not just on Saturday afternoon, but the rest of the season and even going forward in years to come. Pay heed, all who enter, and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. Of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty, and we are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Today, we're going to be doing a little bit more of an in-depth preview of KU and K-State for the Sunflower Showdown coming up on Saturday. And we are also going to be live for our post-game show immediately following the game on Saturday afternoon. You should join us on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. And the best way to do that is to subscribe. All you have to do is click that subscribe button. You'll be notified when we go live on Saturday afternoon following the game. It's 11 a.m. kick, so expect us to be live by 2:30-ish, 2:45-ish, depending on how quickly the game moves. And we'll be talking about the game. Good, bad, ugly, all of the above. We will be there. Win or lose, we'll be live for the post-game reaction to KU and K-State, and we hope you'll join us for that. So once again, best way to do that is to subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. If you're an audio-only listener, don't worry, you can subscribe as well there. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, you can leave a 5-star rating and review. You can also share a comment on our YouTube channel. And I highly encourage you to check out our YouTube channel with comments from Lance Leipold, comments from the coordinators and players as well. And also, if you haven't checked out our previous episode from yesterday on Tuesday, talking to Brandon McAnderson about the K-State rivalry and what it means, I would highly encourage you to check that out as well to hear some of his thoughts on KU and K-State, a little bit about this game this year as well. So just kind of setting the stage for this game. Everybody knows 16 straight for K-State. The streak is on the line once again. And I kind of wanted to start here, Kevin. I started having this sort of interesting dialogue with myself yesterday and overnight and into today as we record this show. And that is, which team has more pressure on them heading into this game? We spent a lot of time talking about Jalen Daniels last week. We spent some time talking about Lance Leipold as well. But I really started to think about this. And from the K-State perspective, K-State's entire season basically now falls on this game. I mean, they are out of contention for the Big 12 title. The season that they thought they were going to have, it's not happening. So they only really have one thing left to hang their hat on for the season, and it's extending the streak. And on the flip side, for Kansas, it's the opposite conversation, which is this is the weakest K-State team you've played in the past 15 plus years. And obviously this is one of the better KU teams that KU has had. And you're going to be at home. That's a bit reflected in the betting lines, which has Kansas favored for the first time since 2009 in this game. So in your mind, which of these programs has more pressure to get it done on Saturday?
I think it's Kansas, honestly. And this may be the first time that I've felt that, because I've often felt, man, if KU can get into a close game with 5 minutes left, a couple minutes left, the pressure starts stacking up on K-State to make the plays, because at that point, you know, KU's supposed to lose in Manhattan a year ago, right? And so you felt like the pressure was going to be on K-State at that point. But honestly, Nick, with it being Jalen Daniels' last go-round, with, you know, Kansas being where it's at in the season, with Kansas being the favorite now, I think some of that kind of shifts back the other way. You know, Kansas State, a lot of people have already written this Wildcat team off for one reason or another. And the other thing is, Nick, we've talked about this before, and I've compared it to KU basketball for so long, sort of knowing in the final few minutes of a tight game at Allen Fieldhouse that they were going to win while the other team hoped to win. I think KU's the team that hopes to win in the final minutes here, whereas K-State feels like it knows it's going to pull it out against Kansas. And so I would argue that I think there's maybe even a little bit more pressure on Kansas, even though traditionally I haven't felt that way. I felt like the pressure is on K-State.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I think it is more on Kansas, but it is an interesting thought, right? Because if you are K-State, just to get into their minds a little bit, even though I don't want to do that. I don't want to think about what they're thinking about, but just to get into their minds a little bit, you know, as I said, this K-State team has already been a a pretty significant disappointment by what if you pay attention to the K-State fans by what they were expecting, right, which was a Big 12 title. They were actually, I believe, weren't they preseason picked to win the Big 12, I believe, as well. So the pressure was there for them to have obviously that type of season, and that's already gone, right? Like that's already wiped away. But I do think also there is something to be said about the fact that if you're on the K-State side, there's pressure to continue the streak, right? It's to the point now where it's such a long streak that you don't want to be the team that loses it, right? You don't want to be the team that gives it away. So I do think there probably is a little bit of pressure from that perspective on the K-State side to keep it up. But kind of as you outlined, I think it definitely falls more on Kansas for some of the reasons that you mentioned, which is KU's favorite in the game. KU obviously now has been very competitive and arguably the better team over the past handful of seasons and still hasn't gotten it across the line. But it's looking like this is their best chance to do so by far over the last 16 plus years. And so there's a lot of pressure on them from that standpoint. It's at home. You've got a 2/3 new stadium. You know, you expect your fans to be showing out for that. And so I would tend to agree with you. I think the pressure is a little bit more on Kansas. And, you know, I think we talked about this a little bit in our show yesterday as well as it pertains to Lance Leipold, which is Lance Leipold came in and obviously from the ground up has been building this Kansas program.
Sure.
And this is the next step in continuing to ascend, right? Is beating K-State, ending the streak. He's had 4 tries, 4 cracks at it, hasn't gotten it done. And if he doesn't get it done this time in this situation, considering the circumstances of the team that you have, the quarterback that you have, and the team that K-State has, boy, that would really, really hurt a lot because this is obviously heading into the game the best chance Kansas has had since the streak began, right? Because of all those factors. So I do think there's a lot of pressure on Kansas from that perspective. And then something that you would know very well, Kevin, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well, is beyond that, the other aspect of this is Kansas is already kind of beating K-State in a lot of areas in terms of off the field recruiting. When you think about what Kansas has done recruiting wise and facilities and NIL investment and all that stuff, Kansas is already, ahead of K-State, but none of that really feels like it matters at all if they can't beat them on the damn field.
Yeah. Yeah. You're 100% right. And I think, you'll hear a lot of Kansas fans this week. I've already heard Kansas fans say, if not now, when, right? In terms of, and I think that's, a little unfair. Just because you lose this year doesn't mean you're going to lose next year or the year after that or whatever else. But I do think that there's a little bit of that attitude kind of seeping in. And to your point, I think you're at almost, I don't want to say a crossroads is the wrong way to put it, but you're kind of at this point where, like you said, a lot of things are kind of starting to trend Kansas's direction, where if you beat K-State in this game, you feel like you can throw the switch and it's full gears ahead. At the same time, you feel like you've taken these sort of steps forward, and if you lose to K-State again, it feels like the bottom kind of drops out on a lot of that as well. You mentioned the in-state recruiting class in particular. There are some guys that Kansas and Kansas State went head-to-head for in this class. There were a few guys in that in-state class that K-State wanted and KU didn't, and vice versa. But there were some, fairly high-profile guys. You want to look at Josh Galbraith. Al Lawrence was a guy that K-State really wanted. J.J. Dunnigan was a guy who was a K-State legacy. A lot of people thought K-State would be a major factor for a guy like Hunter Higgins, and ultimately it kind of came down to KU Wisconsin for Hunter Higgins. And so I'm not saying that's what the new state of recruiting in state or any of those things are going to be. But to your point, Nick, the number one player in the state, I think, for 2027 has a chance to be Tyson Ross out of Andale. He hasn't been reflected in the recruiting sites just yet, but he's a big offensive tackle who's been collecting offers from Oregon and SEC schools and all of that stuff is kind of blown up this season. Guess who's going to be at the game on Saturday? Cooper Omott, who is the guy who's currently ranked as the number one guy in the state of Kansas. Ian Premer's teammate there at Great Bend. Guess who's going to be at the game on Saturday? Gus Corsair, who at verbal commitment, we had Gus ranked in our preseason rankings as the number one player in 2027. Guess who's going to be at the game on Saturday? And I'm just saying that, hey, this is your chance to kind of make a statement in that regard. And it's all of this stuff, right? Like, you want the great atmosphere. You want the fans to make this the sort of thing where those guys look around and they're like, holy crap, like I could see myself playing here in front of all of this. And you want to get the win on the field. And so it is, you do have some of that external pressure that maybe hasn't been there as much for Kansas that's there this year that maybe hasn't been there in previous years.
Yeah, and so again, I firmly believe that the pressure is more on Kansas than Kansas State heading into this game, and I think that will be reflected as the game goes on. If it stays as a close game, that crowd is going to be nervous, right? That's going to be a tense environment, I expect, on Saturday if this ends up being another tight game, because the reality is, guess who always makes the losing plays? Kansas. Guess who always makes the winning plays? K-State. So if it again comes down to those types of moments, it's hard not to have that seed of doubt in the back of your mind of will Kansas get this over the line? And kind of adding on to that thought with the pressure, it's this idea of with K-State, it's almost freeing in a sense that they aren't as a good of a team because now they don't have the pressure on them. Like they can just go out and play loose and, play with the confidence of, hey, we've won this thing 16 years in a row and we'll just go do our thing and win again. Right. So, yeah, I'm nervous about that. I'm nervous. We had a chance to talk to the players on Tuesday afternoon, and there was, I would say, a bit of a weird energy. I don't know. Jalen Daniels was definitely
very, very buttoned up, I would say. Like,
yeah.
If somebody were to say to you, like, quote unquote work trip, like some of you may have seen Desmond Purnell for K-State, had basically a comment I think that ran in the Kansas City Star that was something like, we respect them. They've got really good players. We feel like we're better and we're going to go dominate them. Kansas was very much not going to say anything that was going to pop up on a billboard, even having the chance at somebody manipulating it and putting it in a billboard type way. If it wasn't that way, it was almost like they were already suited up for the game. And this was one of those awkward kind of pregame interviews right before the game's about to kick off. It was a very weird energy.
I was glad to hear Jalen Daniels say that he was pissed off, because that's what I want. I want that energy from Kansas in this game. I want them to come out pissed off. I want them to come out aggressive and with their hair on fire. And, I think we've talked about it off air a little bit. We've mentioned it, I think, on the show as well. The fact that that's very much not Lance Leipold's style, right? He's very much not a, hey, this is bulletin board material. We need to go out and, look what these guys don't respect you. These guys, blah, blah, whatever, X, Y, Z. Lance Leipold is very much a, hey, you know what? We're playing the next team on our schedule. We're going to go out and play like we always do. We're going to go out and practice like we always do. It's nothing special. It's just another game on the schedule. And in a lot of ways, that mentality is great to have, right? But I think for this game specifically, I don't want that. I want Kansas to come out fired up, pissed off, understanding like, no, these guys are not going to come in and disrespect us again and beat us for the 17th straight time. Like, we're not going to let that happen. That's the mentality they want from Kansas. And I was glad to see that. I think Jalen Daniels did have a little bit of that. And as you said, the other guys were all really buttoned up, and just kind of said the right thing. Like, hey, it's just another game. We're going to go out and play the way we play. But damn it, I hope in the locker room that there is a little bit more of that pissed off energy, because that's how I'm feeling. That is how I'm feeling. I'm sick and tired of this crap, Kevin. We collectively, as a fan base, players, whatever, I'm not going to put up with it anymore. Go beat these guys.
You're not a cold tub guy, are you? Like, where you like climb into a cold tub and sit there for like 5 minutes or whatever it is?
No, that sounds psychotic. No.
So, having said that, this Kansas team was made to soak in the cold ice water of that K-State loss all off season long. And it was something that Matt Gildersleeve talked with us about at the start of the spring. Basically, they would do their conditioning thing and they would get to what they called the fourth quarter of their conditioning stuff. And it was part of their work on finishing. And you know what they pulled up that the players had to listen to, had to watch while they were going through it? The final minutes of the K-State game. You know what Kansas has had running in the complex this week as they get prepared for K-State? The final minutes of the K-State game. I imagine that even if guys are saying they're buttoned up, even if you're talking about guys who weren't here last year, a Cam Pickett, an Emmanuel Henderson, a Trey Lathan, I imagine they're tired of seeing the way that last year's game ended. And like you said, Jalen said he was pissed off. I can't imagine having a mistake in the final few minutes and having to relive that over and over again over the offseason and over this week. And so I do think there is a very real chance for Kansas to have sort of that edge that you're talking about coming out in this one, where it's not about being stupid. It's not about, hey, go hit a guy and get a personal foul because it's a late hit. It's about playing, with that extra little bit of something that can get you across the finish line. And maybe I'm crazy about this, Nick, but I feel like this year's team maybe has a better chance to have that little bit of edge than pretty much every previous Kansas team over the last 16 years.
Boy, I sure hope so, because I think they will need it on Saturday for sure against K-State. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this game, X's and O's wise, and maybe what else we expect from this game. This also gives a chance to call all Chiefs fans. You could be on the field at the 50-yard line inside the GEHA field for the official coin toss at a Chiefs home game this season. Visit Chiefs.com/GEHA now. Enter to win for a chance to be on the field for a once-in-a-lifetime view of the pregame coin toss. Plus, you can score other exclusive prizes. Enter for a chance to win at Chiefs.com/GEHA. GEHA is a proud partner of the Kansas City Chiefs. More KU football talk is coming up next.
I'm Brett Goodwin, one of the owners of The Learning Tree. The Learning Tree is a neighborhood toy store in Prairie Village, Kansas. This has been here in this location since 2000s, and my husband Alan and I purchased the store in 2023. Alan and I grew up in families where we've always wanted to have a business together. Alan grew up, for instance, his parents had a jewelry store. I worked in a local toy store here in Prairie Village when I was growing up. When this opportunity happened in 2023, we knew right away we wanted to contact them and pursue the store. We wouldn't have been able to get the store without the team at Emprise Bank. From the day we contacted them, they knew what we needed to do, which was very helpful. I would absolutely recommend the team at Emprise Bank to anyone looking to secure a business. We worked with Emprise from day one. They were extremely helpful. They were always great resources. We talk to them frequently. They know the area. They're very friendly. We know who we're going to talk with, and they know what we need to do. We hope we'll see you at the Learning Tree.
This is the Pay Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. If you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify on audio side, and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Kevin, we just crossed over the 1,300 subscribers mark.
Nice.
So a huge shout out to those of you that have already done so. And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? It takes one click, and you'll also be notified when we do our live reaction shows, including coming up on Saturday afternoon. And by the way, we're entering into that bit of crossover season where we're probably going to be live for some KU basketball games as well, coming up in November and in December through the rest of the season, as well as our KU football live shows as well. So no better time to subscribe on the YouTube side than right now at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We really appreciate you if you have done so. And also feel free to leave us a comment over on YouTube channel. Yes, we do read them. I know it sounds crazy, but yes, we do pay attention and we do read the comments. So really appreciate those of you that share your thoughts and join in on the conversation. Thank you, and we hope that you continue to do so as well. Okay, enough about the on-field, enough about the off-the-field stuff, Kevin. I don't care about that anymore. Let's talk strictly on-field X's and O's here. Kansas is 4-3. K-State's 3-4. Both teams coming off of a bye, by the way, which I'm sure Kevin has talked about it on many occasions. Kansas has been under Lance Leipold pretty dominant off of a bye week. 5-1 in his tenure off a bye week, including 5 out of the last 5. He's won the last 5 straight games off of a bye for KU. K-State has been historically not as great off of bye weeks under Chris Kleiman. So I guess take that as you will. But yeah, this has obviously been a season that kind of talking about in the first segment, not been a great season for K-State, a team that had Big 12 title expectations, got off to a pretty rough start to the year. Arguably should be 2-5. They've had really no business beating North Dakota in their second game of the season. So it's been a bit of a rough season for them. Avery Johnson obviously is the star quarterback, and he's had his ups and downs. It seems like he's starting to run the ball a little bit more over these past couple of games, which is obviously a concern on the Kansas side because KU has struggled against guys that can do that. But then, some pretty good weapons on the outside. Jace Brown, I think, is a real star player for them, wide receiver. They've got a couple other nice big targets, transfers. They utilize the tight ends quite a bit as well. DK McDonald kind of touched on that based off a question you asked him on Tuesday, Kevin. And then, the defense for K-State, I think at times has been susceptible to big plays, surrendering big plays. But other times they've been pretty solid. So I don't know where you want to go to start just kind of breaking down this matchup, but what maybe are you looking at specifically on either side of the ball where you think Kansas may have the edge and can take advantage?
Yeah, where Kansas may have the edge is they may be able to generate some explosive plays in the passing game. Look, Nick, I love this K-State secondary. I really like those guys. They're just young, and I think that they have a really bright future ahead of them, especially if you add in a guy like Logan Bartley that's on the depth chart who's a true freshman. You have a lot of talent back there. Lance Leipold mentioned Wesley Fair. The cornerbacks are really, really good. And are tracking to be really, really good. But I think you can still get them here and there. And so you look at what Kansas had a year ago, where Kansas was, you had a more experienced secondary, right? Kansas was able to get over the top to Quentin Skinner, ultimately dropped it, was later able to get over the top to Luke Graham, who caught it. I think there's going to be some shot play possibilities in this one down the field. And if you're asking me, hey, where can Kansas maybe have an advantage and be able to do it? I think it's there. I like this secondary. Like I said, I really like this secondary's potential. But I think if we're talking about, hey, what's going to happen on Saturday and where can Kansas potentially make some hay, they might be able to connect on some downfield throws and get some explosives back in the offense.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I agree with that. I think, to me, this game may end up being defined by explosive plays both ways. As you said, for this Kansas offense, they've been pretty explosive over the course of this season, right? With Emmanuel Henderson, we've seen them have some, one-play drives, especially when you go back to like Cincinnati game. So that feels like it's going to be available against the K-State defense that has been susceptible at times to that. So I think pushing the ball down the field is something that I hope to see Kansas do in this game. You go back to the Texas Tech game, and unfortunately, it became pretty obvious as the game went on that pushing the ball deep down the field just wasn't going to be an option for Kansas because of the pass rush that Texas Tech was generating. It just wasn't feasible, right? It just wasn't even something you could consider doing. I think if you were KU over the course of that game, there just wasn't enough time.
There wasn't enough time, and the fact that Tech could get pressure with 4 meant they could drop a bunch of guys back, so you weren't going to beat them. Yeah, you didn't have the time, and they had too many guys back. It was like the worst combination of everything you could have for trying to generate explosives in the passing game.
Yeah, but I do think that is something that should be more on the table for Kansas in this game against K-State, to look back downfield. Emmanuel Henderson, spoiler alert, we may be talking a little bit more about him later on in the show, but Emmanuel Henderson has been kind of quiet really over the past couple of games compared to kind of sort of how he started the season. This feels like a game where he could maybe break out again and have a couple of really nice deep plays and make some big time plays down the field. So that's something I'll be keeping an eye on. And then on the flip side, I think it's equally as important to stop explosive plays if you're KU against this K-State offense. One of the big storylines I think coming into this game, Kevin, is going to be Dylan Edwards. What his status is, how much will he play? Chris Kleiman said in his pregame press conference on Monday that they were kind of operating with the game plan that he wasn't going to play. I don't know how much I fully buy that about how much he might play or what their thought process is. Obviously, we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon. We'll see the first availability report on Wednesday. Everybody should know my take on it, which is that it's totally irrelevant. Don't pay attention to anything that's listed on there. But we'll see where they list Dylan Edwards, just sort of as a starting point, I guess, for the week. But if he does play, he is a real home run threat. That's he brings a high level of explosive ability to this K-State offense. If he can't play, he had that great game against UCF earlier in the year that really kind of demonstrated that. But even if he doesn't play, this is still a K-State offense that is capable of generating big time plays, especially if Avery Johnson continues to be more comfortable and more willing to run the ball. Early in the year, he wasn't really doing that, and it was kind of weird. I think it was really bizarre watching him play, where it's like, hey man, you're probably the fastest player on the field. Just go use your legs, So for whatever reason, he wasn't really doing that. he's starting to do it a bit more naturally as he gets ready to play KU, obviously. So that's something to keep an eye on. But then on top of that, Jace Brown is a real explosive play generator as well on the outside for K-State. And honestly, one area where I've seen K-State do a lot of is with downfield passing. If you've watched K-State games, Avery Johnson is not afraid to throw the ball down the field pretty frequently, like deep down the field. So that means that this Kansas secondary is going to have to be on their toes and ready to limit that, because I do think, if you were to set aside everything else, I think you could look at number of explosive plays generated for both offenses in this game, and whoever has more, I think will probably end up being the team that wins the game. That's kind of where I'm at. I think it's going to be that significant on both sides of the ball for A, Kansas to generate them, and B, for Kansas on defense to limit them for K-State.
You may be right. The other thing, obviously, that plugs in that we're going to talk a lot about, I'm sure, is turnovers. And, and so, explosives and turnovers. And most people will be like, well, most games are decided by. No, this game in particular, I think, will be decided by explosives or turnovers. And to our point about where Kansas can maybe get Kansas State, where Kansas can get got, is in the running game, right? There have been times where Kansas is filled really well against the run, and you wind up having guys in the right spot, and the run defense looks pretty good. Look at the second half against UCF, the game against West Virginia for the most part. There have been times where this team has looked really, really good against the run. The Missouri game, Nick, Kansas was really good outside of like 3 or 4 carries. That overall over the course of the game, they did a pretty good job of holding that Missouri game in check. And you look up at the end of the day and you're like, my God, Missouri had a ton of rushing yards. Well, yeah, they're the explosives that you talked about. Right? If you hold a team to 2 yards a carry for 5 carries, and then you give up a 70-yard rushing touchdown, it looks like the other team's running all over you, even though you really only had one play that you didn't play it well. And so that's going to be the key for Kansas's run defense in particular. Most of the time, they're doing a good job. They're where they should be. They're getting run stops and things like that. Where they get into trouble is those explosives when they give up, where, they have a guy who is wrong shouldering, and they're expecting him to kind of create a pile. And I know that for those of you that I just spoke French right there, like basically when you're dealing with a pulling blocker, there are multiple schools of thought there, and a lot depends on what you're coaching the defense to do behind that guy. Wrong shouldering means you attack the inside shoulder of the puller, which basically means you're trying to squeeze the run to the outside so the guys can fill out wide and make a play. Well, that doesn't work if everybody's planning to stop the run on the inside and then he gets the outside and there's nobody there. Likewise, if you do what's called a pile or a stack, where you just basically try and stack up that guy so he can't get outside and he has to turn back inside, if your guys are flowing to the outside to try and stop the run, all of a sudden he's got a pretty good path. And that's really specific. But the reason I bring that up, Nick, is that's been the problem, is that Kansas has been getting out-gapped on one side or the other based on basically the way that they're filling behind whatever the decision is on a puller in particular. And so the better that they do in terms of being in sync on that, where, the two things are matching up, the better Kansas is going to be. And quite frankly, Nick, if Kansas can limit explosives and be in the right spot on running downs, they're going to give themselves a really great chance to win this football game.
Yeah, because I don't know that I fully trust K-State in third down and long situations to be, really successful in those scenarios. So you're right. You have to win on those early downs when it comes to the run game. And again, to me, that comes down to two things. It comes down to focus and communication, right? Your defense needs to be on the same page, and you have to be focused on every play. Because the end result is kind of to what you were mentioning, is that the numbers for Kansas look terrible when it comes to run defense. They are bottom 15 in the country in both yards per game surrendered and also yards per rush allowed. Now, as you mentioned, some of that has to do with the fact that you had given up some big run plays. When you think back to the Missouri game that you mentioned, the Cincinnati game, there were several big runs for the Bearcats. This last game against Texas Tech, obviously on the first play from scrimmage, you give up a 70-yard touchdown, the 70-plus yard touchdown run as well. So, the numbers, I don't really necessarily tell the full story of maybe how bad the run defense really is versus, okay, it's really not that bad. You're just giving up some big plays. But the bottom line is, yes, you're going to have to stay locked in on that, especially, again, if Dylan Edwards plays, because he's the type of guy that, hey, if you're going to try to put everybody in and stop a run inside, he can bounce to the outside and he will score. So especially if he ends up playing, that's a real concern for this Kansas run defense, because we talked about it. We feel like the D-line, especially the interior of the D-line, has been the strength of this team, but run defense takes all 11 guys. And so if you are not locked in behind or making plays behind, then it doesn't really matter. So yeah, that's a real concern. To me, again, it becomes a much bigger concern if Dylan Edwards ends up playing. But even if he doesn't play, I think it's still something you have to be really worried about when trying to slow down this K-State offense, is that you got to stay locked in on the run. And again, you have to also be aware of Avery Johnson as a runner as well and what he may do. K-State also, similarly to Kansas, has used some backup quarterback run plays with Blake Barnett. So we'll see if K-State goes to any of that as well. But same deal, you got to be ready for that. So again, just underscoring, I think that'll be a big factor. And then you also mentioned it as well, but turnovers are probably going to be an also big determining factor in this game. And I'll just go beyond that, Kevin. I'm just going to create a new term here. Stupid plays. Okay.
Yeah.
Lance Leipold talked about it a little bit on Monday, especially over the past couple of years. It feels like in every game you can point to a handful of plays where it was just a stupid play for Kansas. It was just a dumb, just boneheaded plays for Kansas. Some of them a little bit unlucky. Some of them just straight up bad plays. And that's happened to Kansas over a handful of the past several years, where there's been 2 or 3 of those plays throughout the game. So I think, and turnovers go into that as well, but turnovers plus stupid plays, I think is what I'm going to call it. Can you basically not do that if you're Kansas? Because, regardless of what K-State has done up to this point in the season, regardless of the fact that, they've looked like a really terrible team at times, they're going to come into this game and more than likely not beat themselves. And that's just a reality. So if you're Kansas, you have to match that. You can't make dumb plays in a game like this, or stupid plays in a game like this, and still expect to win. So you got to play a clean game, because K-State's probably going to play a clean game. One final thought here before we get to another break, Kevin, is the one area of this game that is a little bit different this year compared to the past is Kansas seemingly should have a pretty significant edge when it comes to special teams. That has not always been the case. Obviously, K-State used to call themselves Special Teams U. I don't think they can do that anymore because they've been bad for the past couple of years. But, last year, a 51-yard field goal ends up being the difference maker for K-State to win the game. Laith Marjan hasn't missed a kick yet this season, including a 50-plus yarder. So that's a positive sign. It's been a pretty successful punting-wise for Kansas. Obviously, we've seen what Emmanuel Henderson can do as a kickoff returner as well. Tate Nagy is, at this point, a fairly reliable pair of hands punt returning. I won't say that I'm, there's been some questionable things that he has done over the course of the season, but overall, I think he's been reliable. And on the flip side, K-State has struggled. K-State has had various issues with their own special teams. So that's another area where you expect heading into it that Kansas should have the edge, you would hope. But I guess you never know. Is this the part where we have to knock on wood, because that's what Lance Leipold did? So if you got wood, knock.
That was weird, because I asked the question about special teams and the special teams being really good, and he said last time he got asked about it was the Cincinnati game, and a guy took a return back. The return was called back by a flag, though, Nick. So he was saying, oh, man, last time you guys talked about how good the special teams were, you gave up a big return. Not so fast, my friend. That thing was that thing was called back. So I will knock on wood, for Lance Leipold's sake, but that housed return was not legally housed, and Cincinnati had to take the ball back down the field.
Okay, let's take one more final break here. When we come back, we'll get into some players to watch, plus our predictions for the game. That's coming up next.
Chiefs Kingdom, I have got a question for you. What is your favorite touchdown? Well, for me, I can confidently say that my favorite touchdown, it's the next one, because with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, every touchdown could bring you closer to cashing in. From the first touchdown score to anytime touchdown props or the thrill of live in-game betting, every snap is loaded with opportunity. From spreads to money lines, same-game parlays, regular parlays, you want it, DraftKings has got it. Here's the best part. Bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. I use DraftKings Sportsbook, and you should too. Your team hitting pay dirt pays out to you. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, fees may apply in Illinois. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bet must win to receive reward. Minimum minus 500 odds required. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
This is the Pay Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. If you haven't already and you've made it this far to the show, what are you doing? Subscribe, Apple, Spotify, and audio, and also on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. And again, I think win or lose, Saturday afternoon's post-game show should be an interesting one. And the best way to know when we go live after the game is to be subscribed on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. So thank you if you have done so. Really appreciate you. And we look forward to you hopefully joining us on Saturday afternoon following the KU K-State game. That is an 11 a.m. kick. By the way, I don't know if you've seen the early weather forecast. We're recording this on Tuesday afternoon. The current weather forecast potentially for Saturday is heavy rain, chance of a lot of rain, especially in the morning on Saturday. Hopefully it clears up by game time, but I guess we'll see how that plays out. But that's just another added potential factor to the game is the weather, because it's going to be a little bit colder, quite a bit colder, and it could be a damp one out there as well at David Booth Kansas Memorial Stadium. So I don't know, something else to keep in mind. All right, let's get into some players to watch, Kevin. Let's start with the Kansas offense. KU's offense coming into this game. Who's a player to keep an eye on?
I get the feeling you and I are kind of thinking on the same lines in this one.
Okay, I have two in case you steal mine. So.
Yeah. Once again, it's Jalen. I mean, we had a big portion of an episode where we talked about how this is a quote unquote legacy game for Jalen and the way that he's perceived it at Kansas. But Emmanuel Henderson is the guy that immediately jumps out. And I think when you look at Henderson, when you look at Pickett as well, I think that this is a game where Kansas will need some explosives to be successful. I think Kansas State's defense is pretty good from a down-to-down standpoint, which means it's pretty tough to go 12, 13 plays and find the end zone. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is difficult. And the thing that's going to make it a lot easier is if you're able to generate some explosives. Emmanuel Henderson is the guy that you get him in single coverage, find a way to get him out there. He can run by just about anybody in the Big 12. And so he's the guy that I kind of have out there. And also, Nick, I think when you look at some of the drops that Emmanuel Henderson has had in key situations, they've come on the road, right? And I'm not saying that, as an excuse. I'm saying as a receiver, you talk to anybody, different places have different sight lines. The lights hit you in different ways. The sun hits you in different ways. I wonder if Emmanuel Henderson is going to have a chance to have another big game in this one, especially if Kansas State tries to make Kansas one-dimensional and make Jalen beat them.
Emmanuel Henderson was my 1A option as well for some of what you outlined. And we talked about explosive plays earlier in the show. Emmanuel Henderson's a big part of that, and so he needs to be a guy I think that has a big game against K-State. So he was my initial pick. But another guy that we haven't really talked about, and actually he played against Texas Tech, Kevin, and we just kind of glossed over it. Look, there was a lot of things happening with Texas Tech game. There was pocket knife gate. There was obviously kind of the roller coaster of the game and how things ended up playing out in the second half. But one thing we didn't talk about is the fact that Daniel Highshaw ended up playing against Texas Tech and ended up looking fairly healthy for the most part in the game. Despite the fact that early in the week before Texas Tech, Lance Leipold had made a comment that at least I kind of thought, or I kind of read it as, he might not play. And I even sort of speculated to myself, and I think on the show as well, that I was like, maybe you wait until after the bye week and hopefully get Highshaw back. Well, he ends up playing against Texas Tech, and again, looks pretty healthy. And now you've had the bye week, so I can only assume that he's in even better shape now. And for all this talk about Jalen Daniels as, a guy that's been here really since day one with Lance Leipold and obviously hasn't beaten K-State, Daniel Highshaw has been here just as long. I mean, he has been here for all those games as well. He's been a part of this program for that same period of time. And obviously he hasn't been a part of a win either. And so I'm going to be watching a little bit on Daniel Highshaw because this Kansas run game has not been very good over the course of the last handful of games in the season. And let's be honest, a lot of that has to do with the fact that I think Daniel Highshaw hasn't been available, right? It's pretty clear to me that this Kansas rushing offense needs both Daniel Highshaw and Leshawn Williams. And the reality is that hasn't really happened at all this season. You had Leshawn Williams banged up for some games, right? He ended up, I think he was banged up even for the Texas Tech game. And obviously Daniel Highshaw has been out of the lineup for some games as well. I get the impression that both those guys are I don't want to say fully healthy, but healthy enough heading into this game against K-State. So Daniel Highshaw is a guy that I'll be keeping an eye on, because if suddenly Kansas can get that ground game really rolling, that would obviously make a huge difference in sort of how I would view this game if KU is able to run the ball successfully, because they haven't really been able to do that much over the course of some of these games, especially the games that they've lost, right? When you think about the Tech game, you think about the Missouri game as well. They haven't had a lot of success rushing the football. If you can flip that switch, if you can flip that script with a healthy-ish Daniel Highshaw and a healthy-ish Leshawn Williams, that would set things up very well for Kansas. So I'll be keeping an eye on Emmanuel Henderson. Don't get me wrong. He was my 1A, but Kevin obviously stole Emmanuel Henderson because apparently he cheats and looks at my notes. So I'll go my second option, who I didn't put in my notes just in case Kevin would steal my 1A and Emmanuel Henderson, and I went with Daniel Highshaw.
I like that pick, and I like it because, Nick, we had a chance to see him both in the spring and then in fall practice, and I can't explain to people who weren't there like how good Daniel Highshaw looked. If you saw my tweets about it, I said he looked like an all-conference back, and obviously you still have to have the blocking, you still have to have the different things. The blocking, I don't feel like they've been very far off, but one of the things that I saw in that Tech game that I hadn't really seen a ton of even early in the season, Nick, but saw in practice, was the way that he was sort of pivoting and changing directions and things like that. And I think that's something that could really help Kansas out. We've talked on this show before about how one of the great things about Devin Neal was he made the offensive line right. There were times where they didn't block something perfectly and he would make a guy miss or make a cut. And next thing you know, it's still a positive gain. I think Daniel Highshaw can do some of those things. And so I really like your pick in terms of him being a guy that could potentially help, spur a little bit more running game than they've had. And thus, kind of take some of that pressure off of Jalen to be, brilliant, perfect, however you want to put it, for Kansas to win this game.
Yeah, as you mentioned there at the end, Jalen Daniels obviously is sort of the number one player to watch, but we had spent so much time talking about him. We devoted an entire decent segment of a show last week talking about him. So yes, Jalen Daniels obviously will need to play well and be in the spotlight in this game as well. But going beyond that, I think Emmanuel Henderson, as you kind of outlined, and what I said about Daniel Highshaw as well, those are two guys to keep an eye on as well. Flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, how does Kansas slow down K-State, and who is a player that you're going to be keeping an eye on for this game?
I'll be interested to hear if I stole your pick on this one too. I'm going with Bengali Kamara. And there are a few reasons for that. One, I think Bengali Kamara is an explosive defensive player who can create negative plays. And you talked about the importance of putting K-State behind the chains. Bengali Kamara is one of those guys that your defense can be getting beat. And then all of a sudden the other team gets the ball at the 30, it's 1st and 10, and boom, tackle for loss. The next thing you know, it's 3rd and 12. And he's somebody that can be almost a single-handed drive stopper from that point of view. I also want to pick Bengali Kamara, though, Nick, because there are times when that I hate to call it freelancing, but he's been out of position a few times, and that's hurt Kansas from a run defensive standpoint. If he locks that part down where he's still giving you the explosive stuff, he's still making plays, but also he's not out of position. He's where he's supposed to be. He's helping to set the edge in the run game. Then I think he could be an incredibly important part to this. The other reason that I mentioned him, though, Nick, is if you remember a year ago, Kansas was kind of struggling to get after Avery Johnson a little bit. And you started seeing pressure from the second and third levels. When you looked at J.B. Brown, when you looked at Marvin Grant, they sent Marvin Grant a few times and had some success with it. I wonder if that's something that Kansas is going to do in this game, whether it's Lyric Rawls, whether it's some of those other guys. Lyric Rawls is going to have his hands full because obviously he's going to be important to help against the tight end and all of that stuff. But I think Bengali Kamara is one of the best pass rushers on this roster. And so he's somebody that I think no matter where you line him up, whether it's on the edge, whether it's at linebacker, he's somebody that could help you potentially get after Avery Johnson, get him to the turf, and create some negative plays that way as well.
Well, and also I would say, to add on to your thought on Bengali Kamara, he's your fastest, most athletic linebacker. So if this turns into a game where Avery Johnson is scrambling and or running the ball a little bit more, he's your number one guy to sort of stop that, I think, because he's the guy that I think can sort of match that speed and athleticism against Avery Johnson. If things end up going that route and we see Avery Johnson trying to utilize his legs more, Bengali Kamara becomes Kansas's best weapon, I think, to sort of stop that. That's a great pick. It wasn't my pick, actually, because although you did mention my pick, and that's because my pick is Lyric Rawls.
There you go. Yeah, you like it.
Lyric Rawls, I think I mentioned earlier in the show, Kevin, talking about pissed off, talking about, not letting Kansas State disrespect you, having that sort of swagger of, we're not going to take it anymore. If there's a player on this Kansas team that I think is on the defense, especially, that sort of epitomizes that mentality on the field, I think it's Lyric Rawls. Watch him in games. He goes and he will make big hits. He will make his presence felt. And I think in a game like this, you need a guy like that to have that level of impact, to make those big hits, to say, hey, we're here, right? And, we're not going to take this anymore. I am going to punish you over the middle of the field. I'm going to punish you if you try to, scramble for Avery Johnson or whatever it may be. And I think Lyric Rawls is that guy. And as you touched on as well, Lyric Rawls also is going to have a very tough job in terms of responsibility in this game, because he's probably going to be, that guy that's going to be involved over the middle of the field with dealing with what K-State does at tight end, right? Garrett Oakley is a really strong tight end. They've also got Willie Ancio, so he's going to have a lot on his plate from that perspective as well. But to me, I think he's the guy that I think can be a real tone setter in the secondary as well. Obviously, I think both you and I love Jalen Todd. We love Austin Alexander and what those guys can bring. But those are young players. And I think when you look at Lyric Rawls, he has a chance to be a little bit of a leadership guy on the field, especially over the middle of the field, and make those plays. And beyond that, we got the depth chart, the two deep that Kansas provides each week. And there was a name that was noticeably absent from the depth chart in the secondary, which was Mason Ellis. We'll see what his status is if he plays, but if ultimately he ends up not being able to play, then you're talking about a starter that's missing from your secondary, which does add a little bit more onto the plate of those guys, of Taylor Davis, of Lyric Rawls. So that's something to potentially monitor as well. But Lyric Rawls is my guy because, again, to me, in a game like this, where you want to set the tone, you want to establish yourself as an equal, you're not going to be disrespected. Lyric Rawls is a guy that can do that. And Bengali Kamara is a guy that can do that as well, too. But from the secondary standpoint, Lyric Rawls is the guy that I'm watching.
Yeah, I like that pick. Like I said, I think he would have a lot of responsibilities, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to see them get him involved in the pass rush at times to try and send a little bit of a different look. Again, Marvin Grant was a guy that Kansas started to send in that game, and you think about the long field goal that you mentioned that won it for K-State, the play right before that, the drive ends because of the fact that Marvin Grant got to Avery Johnson. If he had gotten there just a split second earlier, might have pushed him out of field goal range, one, or two, might have even put him in a position to turn that football over. But I think, I really like that pick. I think generally speaking, Nick, turnovers and special teams are going to be so huge in this one, because I think if Kansas wins the turnover battle or even ties the turnover battle and doesn't give away a pick six or a turnover that results in points, Kansas is going to be right there in this thing. And I think the one way that Kansas State is able to kind of pull away and make this not a contest where we're not talking about it in the final 5 minutes and we're saying, oh gosh, got to 17, you had a wasted opportunity in the fourth quarter, it's because you're giving away, big special teams play, turnovers, what was it? You called it stupid plays?
Stupid plays.
Stupid plays, bad decisions, however you want to put it. I think taking care of the football, making sure K-State doesn't get hidden yards, if you can do those things, then you're going to have every chance to win this game.
A couple other quick notes. One thing that I found pretty interesting, both Lance Leipold and Jim Zabrowski spoke about this, is KU's use or lack thereof of the option game. And Lance Leipold and Jim Zabrowski both kind of describing how you look at the opposing defense and sort of how they're lined up, and that kind of has determined a little bit whether or not Kansas will go to the option. I hate that, first of all, just flat out. Like, I absolutely hate that. Like, what are we doing? What do you mean you're letting the defense just automatically eliminate a whole chunk of plays that you potentially have just because of how they might be lined up? That's ridiculous. Run the option. I want to see it. I don't give a damn what the defense is doing. Just run it. You know why? Because Jalen Daniels is a very experienced quarterback, and I trust that he can do it. So I didn't really understand that at all, and I hated it. So we'll see what KU does and if they're willing to do that more as regards to the option with Jalen Daniels. But that was for me. I listened to Lance Leipold and I was left saying, "Huh," and then I listened to Jim Zabrowski and I was saying, "What the hell? What do you mean? No, if you execute it, it doesn't matter what the defense is doing." So that kind of irked me a little bit. We'll see what that means, I guess, against K-State and going forward the rest of the season. So that was one thing that kind of stuck out to me. And then, yeah, I mean, just kind of circling back, this general sense of wanting to simultaneously discuss this game as being just another game on the schedule for Kansas versus, to me at least, like, depending on how the game unfolds, I may be post-game saying, like, you know what, just fold the program. I don't even care anymore. Just shut it down. Like, if you lose, I don't even care. Like, just end it. I don't even care. Just demolish the rest of the booth. Who cares? What's the point anymore? Why are we even doing this? Like, I may be at that state if KU doesn't win this game, or if it unfolds in how we've seen the previous couple games unfold, where like they look like the better team or whatever. So to me, and I think for a lot of Kansas fans, this is not just another game, right? And so I'm fine with Lance Leipold and saying that publicly or whatever, all the players being buttoned up, whatever, all that. I just hope that in the locker room there is that passion, there is that energy, there is that understanding of like, no, this is not just another game. Like, this is a chance to really cement something significant for this Kansas program in terms of, again, talked about earlier in the show, but taking that next step forward. This, to me, it feels like the next logical step forward is to win this game and then set yourself up for the last 4 games of the season to, go win 7-8 games, maybe even still be in the Big 12 title conversation. Who the hell knows with how this conference is going? You might still be in that discussion, right? If you win this game and play well down the stretch of the season, or at the very least set yourselves up to have a winning season and go on to potentially win a bowl game. But it all comes down to this game. I mean, I really believe that. And so even if maybe outwardly nobody around the Kansas program is saying that, I hope that internally there is that recognition of the opportunity that lays in front of them to really turn the tide of not just this rivalry, but this entire program, because it feels like this is the next step. This is the next thing that has to happen. And to me, at the end of the day, with how this game is shaping up, it's it's just not an option. Failure is just not an option. Losing this game is just not an option at this point for Kansas. They have to get it done. It has to happen. And I hope it does, obviously. And again, if it doesn't, I maybe, you know what, just blow it all up. I don't even care anymore. Fold the program. Who cares? What's the point? I'm just saying, like, that's just going to be my mentality. I'm just warning you, Kevin. That's just going to be where I'm at. That's how important I think this game is. And while, yes, I respect the coach mentality of, well, it's just another game. We need to be fired up for every game, blah, 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 blah. That's all fine and dandy. I just hope that the players understand, no, this is not just another game. This is a real chance to really, really change something with this program, not just on Saturday afternoon, but the rest of the season and even going forward in years to come.
Yeah, I understand your point. I think the players realize that. I think the coaches realize that this isn't just another game. And I think there's definitely some press conference speak there for sure. And I do think that this is a game that very much has Kansas's attention. It's funny. You got 2 rants on this show, Nick, and I actually had a little bit of one, as much as ranty as I can get, which most of you guys will know is not that much. Lance Leipold didn't say anything inflammatory when he was talking about the fans. Like, people really took that to be, oh my God, win a few games, Lance, or whatever. All he was saying was that we have this big, beautiful stadium, but you need the fans to have a great atmosphere there. There was no putting down. There was no, like, we need to have a lot better atmosphere than what we've had, let me tell you. Like, he didn't say anything remotely inflammatory. And I realize that there are some fans that, feel like, hey, for whatever reason they've been put down. They're upset that so far Kansas is 4-3 when maybe you had a chance to win another game or two. But I think all he was saying was that Kansas has a chance to have a special atmosphere if everything comes together. The new booth, the fans, the acoustics in the new booth, like we've talked about, Nick, once you finish that up, people are going to be on top of the field. It's going to be really, really noisy. But you can't have any of that without the fans. And I think the funny thing is, he alluded to Allen Fieldhouse and talked about, and a lot of those fans are the same fans, right? So he was saying, Allen Fieldhouse, it's not the building that makes the atmosphere. It's the fans that make the atmosphere what it is. And I think when he was talking about, hey, we played against this at Texas Tech. Hey, the atmosphere was this on the road. And then saying, we need to continue to build it. And he even said, we need to do our part and get people excited for it. But I didn't think any of that was really remotely inflammatory at all. And it's truthful. They do need the fans. And as we sit here Tuesday, October 21st, the K-State game isn't sold out yet, Nick. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not saying, hey, the tickets aren't expensive, because they are. And I think, that's been one of the trade-offs with the new stadium and all the different things that go with that. But the way for Kansas to sort of have this amazing football atmosphere, the construction's part of it. Bringing in the bowl from like 3 miles away from the football field is going to help with the acoustics. The second part of it, though, is you need somebody's ass in that seat that's going to stand up and cheer and make that wall of noise over there. And so I think that's all he was saying. It wasn't, you're not doing your jobs as fans. It was more, hey, we need the fans at the booth to make this the type of atmosphere that it can be. And he's absolutely right. I look forward to and hope, Nick, that on Saturday, in addition to, Kansas going out and playing well, that it's one of those games that you and I walk out of that building being like, man, like, I had chills because of the way the fans were out there, and I hope that the fans turn out in that way.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Ranting About Sports here on the Pay Podcast. Yeah, we'll be excited. We'll be there on Saturday. Hope to see those of you out there as well cheering on KU, and I hope that you'll join us live after the game on YouTube, because, again, it's going to be an adventure of a show, I think, one way or another. So you'll want to join us live on our YouTube channel. You can do that by subscribing on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN. That way you'll be notified when we go live on Saturday afternoon. Share a comment, share your thoughts. We love to hear from you fans. Drop a comment. Yes, we do read all of them. We appreciate those of you that do comment. Leave us 5-star rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Felt good to get some rants out of the way. We both got some rants out of our system here this afternoon.
We won't have nearly as many rants on our show post Big 12 media basketball. I don't think.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
I find out.
Yeah, that's right. I will also say, obviously, this is a very busy week for us with KU and K-State coming up. But yes, we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon. Tomorrow is Wednesday. We're going to be at Big 12 Media Day for basketball. So you can look forward to some content from that later in the week of us talking some more KU basketball as well, if you want to get some of that in for the KU K-State game on Saturday. So yeah, tons of stuff coming your way, tons of content. And again, I remind you also, if you want more rants, because if today wasn't enough for you, check out our previous show with Brandon McAnderson, where he talked about the KU K-State game a little bit as well. So lots of great stuff on our channel, on our feed, on audio, and on our YouTube channel as well, for you guys to consume and enjoy leading up to KU and K-State. And we hope you do enjoy the game, maybe, if KU wins. And then we'll see you on Saturday. So until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.